Close your eyes and take a slow breath, and imagine a world without maps, a world with no glowing screens, no satellites in the sky, and no clear lines dividing countries. There are only vast lands and endless oceans stretching beyond imagination. And in this world, the horizon is not a destination, but a mystery. The ocean is not just water, it is fear, it is darkness, something people respect deeply and something they are afraid of, because once you sail too far, you might never return. For centuries, people believed the ocean was alive, not in a peaceful way, but in a terrifying one. Sailors whispered stories about creatures beneath the waves, massive shadows moving silently in the deep, eyes glowing in the darkness below. Some said they had seen something rise from the water only to disappear again, while others spoke of ships that vanished overnight with no storm and no warning, simply gone. At night, the ocean became something else entirely. The wind would slow, the waves would calm, and the silence would grow heavy. Men would sit on wooden decks listening, not to sounds, but to the absence of them, because sometimes silence is more frightening than noise. Some sailors prayed, some whispered the names of their loved ones, and some simply stared into the darkness as if expecting something to stare back. In the early 1500s, the world was not fully understood. Maps existed, but they were incomplete, some places drawn accurately while others were based on guesswork, and many areas were completely blank. Large parts of the world were marked as unknown. Europe knew parts of Africa and had some knowledge of Asia, but beyond that there was only imagination, and imagination often creates fear. Two powerful kingdoms, Spain and Portugal, stood at the center of exploration, both wanting the same things: wealth, power, and control over trade. But the greatest treasure of all was not gold, it was something much smaller: spices. Today, spices seem ordinary, but in the 1500s, they were priceless. Cinnamon, cloves, and nutmeg were not just ingredients, they were symbols of wealth. They preserved food, added flavor, and showed status. Owning spices meant power. The problem was that these spices came from faraway lands in Asia that were difficult to reach. The journey was long, dangerous, and controlled. Most explorers followed one route. They sailed south around Africa and then east toward Asia. This path was long, filled with storms, and required great skill, but it worked. Because it worked, Portugal became very powerful. They controlled the route, the trade, and access to spices. This meant anyone who wanted wealth had to depend on Portugal, and not everyone was comfortable with that. To avoid conflict, Spain and Portugal made an agreement that would shape history. It was known as the Treaty of Tordesillas. A line was drawn across the world, with everything to the west belonging to Spain and everything to the east belonging to Portugal. But there was a problem. No one truly knew where that line actually was, because no one knew how big the world really was. It was like drawing a boundary on a map that was not complete, a decision made based on uncertainty. In Portugal, near the edge of the ocean, a young boy stood quietly watching, listening, and learning. His name was Ferdinand Magellan. He was not special, not yet. He had no power and no wealth, but he had something else: curiosity. Every time a ship returned, he would go to the port and stand at a distance, listening. Sailors would talk about distant lands, strange cultures, and long journeys. Some stories were exciting, others were terrifying, but Magellan listened to all of them carefully, as if each word meant something important. As time passed, those stories stayed with him. They did not fade away, they grew stronger. He began to imagine places he had never seen, oceans he had never crossed, and paths that no one had taken. Slowly, a question formed in his mind, a quiet but powerful question. What if there is another way? Not the known route, not the eastern path, but something different, something new, a western path. The ocean seemed to call him, not with words, but with feeling. Every wave, every breeze, every distant horizon felt like an invitation to explore, to discover, to go beyond. But with that call came fear, because the ocean did not promise safety, it promised uncertainty, danger, and the unknown. And yet, Magellan did not turn away. At night, when the stars filled the sky and the ocean reflected their light, the world felt calm and still, as if nothing would ever change. But beneath that calm, something was beginning, a journey that would challenge everything people believed, a journey that would change maps, knowledge, and history itself. And it all started with a simple idea. Now, as the waves gently move and the night grows quiet, the story pauses here. A boy with a dream stands at the edge of the world, not knowing that one day he will lead the greatest expedition in history. But that journey has not begun yet. It is still waiting beyond the horizon. The ocean never stays the same. Even when it looks calm on the surface, it is always moving underneath. Quiet, endless, and powerful. And in the same way, something was also moving inside the mind of Ferdinand Magellan. He was no longer a young dreamer standing at the shore. Years at sea had changed him. He had traveled across dangerous waters, seen storms that destroyed ships, and witnessed how fragile human life becomes in the middle of the ocean. Every journey taught him the same truth. The world is bigger and more unpredictable than most people believe. During those years, Magellan worked along the known trade routes controlled by Portugal. Ships moved between Europe, Africa, and Asia, carrying valuable spices like cinnamon, cloves, and pepper. These were not ordinary goods. In that era, spices were worth more than gold. They built empires, funded wars, and decided the power of kingdoms. Portugal controlled most of this trade route. They sailed around Africa and across the Indian Ocean to reach Asia. It was a long, dangerous journey, but it worked. And because it worked, Portugal became extremely powerful. Magellan understood this system well, but understanding it also made him question it. He began to think deeply about the structure of the world. The maps he saw were incomplete, large areas were unknown, and distances were often guessed incorrectly. The more he observed, the more he felt something important was missing. A simple question started forming in his mind. What if there is another way to reach Asia? At first, it was just a thought, but slowly it became a serious idea. Instead of sailing east around Africa, what if someone sailed west across the Atlantic Ocean? Could it be possible to reach Asia from the opposite direction? Most people at that time would have called this idea foolish. The ocean to the west was unknown, and no one had successfully crossed it to reach Asia. The risk was enormous. Ships could get lost, supplies could run out, and entire crews could disappear without a trace. But Magellan did not dismiss the idea. Instead, he studied it in his mind again and again. The more he thought, the more possible it seemed. The world, after all, had never been fully explored. There were still blank spaces on maps, and where there is unknown space, there is always possibility. He believed that the Earth was round enough that sailing west might eventually lead to the east. If that were true, it could change everything. A new route would break Portugal's control over trade and open a direct path for other kingdoms. But ideas alone are not enough to change the world. They need support. Magellan first presented his idea to the Portuguese leadership. He explained carefully how a western route might work, but the response was cold. Portugal already had a working system. They did not want to risk resources on something uncertain. To them, it was unnecessary and dangerous. Magellan was rejected. This rejection was a turning point in his life. Many people would have stopped here, but Magellan was not someone who gave up easily. Instead of ending his dream, rejection made it stronger. He made a bold decision. He left Portugal. Leaving one's homeland is never simple. It means leaving behind identity, comfort, and familiarity. But Magellan was not driven by comfort. He was driven by possibility. He traveled to Spain, a rival of Portugal in global exploration. Spain was ambitious and eager to expand its influence. Unlike Portugal, Spain had not yet secured a dominant trade route to Asia. This made them more open to new ideas. Magellan saw an opportunity. But even in Spain, nothing was guaranteed. He was not a nobleman. He had no political power. He was simply an explorer with a risky idea about the world. Convincing a kingdom required patience and determination. He spoke repeatedly about his plan, a western route to Asia, a new path across the unknown ocean, a chance for Spain to gain power in global trade. Some listened, many doubted, but slowly his idea reached the right ears. Eventually, it reached King Charles I of Spain. The king considered the idea carefully. If Magellan was right, Spain could gain access to Asian trade without relying on Portugal. That alone made the idea valuable. But it was still a risk. No one had ever proven this route existed. After discussion and evaluation, the king made a decision. He agreed to support the expedition. Magellan would be given ships, men, and supplies to attempt the journey. It was a moment that turned imagination into reality. But approval was only the beginning. The real challenge was ahead. Ships had to be prepared, crews had to be selected, supplies had to be gathered. Every detail mattered, because once they left land, there would be no easy return. As the ships waited in the harbor, the sea stretched endlessly ahead, calm on the surface, but hiding countless secrets below. Magellan stood near the docks, looking into the distance. He was no longer just a man with a dream. He was now the leader of a journey that could change history. And beyond that horizon, the unknown was waiting.
The harbor was quiet, but not peaceful. It was the kind of silence that carries tension inside it. Ships stood ready near the shore, their sails folded, ropes tied tightly, and wooden decks creaking softly with the movement of the wind. The ocean stretched ahead, wide, endless, and unknown. This was the moment Ferdinand Magellan had been waiting for. After years of thinking, planning, and convincing powerful leaders, his idea had finally become real. 5 ships had been prepared for the journey: Trinidad, San Antonio, Concepcion, Santiago, and Victoria. Each one carried men, supplies, and most importantly, hope mixed with fear. The crew was not fully aware of what they were stepping into. Some believed they were going on a regular trading expedition. Others understood it might be something far more dangerous, but none of them truly knew how far the journey would go. Magellan stood on the dock, watching his men board the ships. His face was calm, but inside his mind was heavy with responsibility. He knew that once they left, there would be no easy return. The ocean would decide everything from that point forward. On a distant level of history, the world itself was still divided between 2 major powers, Spain and Portugal. Spain had approved this expedition, hoping it would lead to a new route to Asia and break Portugal's control over trade. That political hope now rested on wooden ships floating in the water. Finally, the day arrived. The anchors were lifted. The sails began to rise slowly, catching the wind, and the ships moved. At first, it was gentle. The water carried them forward as if the ocean itself was allowing their departure. But as the shoreline slowly moved away, something changed in the atmosphere. The land that represented safety became smaller and smaller until it was just a thin line on the horizon. Many sailors stood in silence. Some looked back, some looked forward, and some simply stared at the water, realizing that there was now no turning back. Magellan remained steady at the front of his ship. He was not celebrating. He was not smiling. He was thinking. Ahead of him was a path no one had successfully completed before, a western route across the unknown ocean. The wind grew stronger. The ships aligned themselves and moved into open sea. The expedition had officially begun. As the land disappeared completely behind them, the ocean became their entire world. There was no road, no guide, no certainty, only water, sky, and the distant hope of discovery. Somewhere deep in the minds of the crew, fear quietly settled in. But so did curiosity, because even fear cannot fully erase the feeling of stepping into history. And as the ship sailed further into the unknown, the greatest expedition in history had truly started. The ocean never stays the same. Even when it looks calm on the surface, it is always moving underneath. Quiet, endless, and powerful. And in the same way, something was also... The land slowly disappeared behind them. At first, it was clear. Mountains, trees, and the coastline still visible like a fading memory. But as the ships moved further into the ocean, everything began to shrink. The world they knew was slipping away, replaced by endless water and open sky. For the sailors, this was the first true moment of realization. They were no longer near safety. There was no easy return. Only the ocean remained. Ferdinand Magellan stood on the deck of his ship, watching the horizon. The wind pushed against the sails, and the wooden structure creaked softly as the ships moved deeper into unknown waters. He did not speak much. He was observing everything: the weather, the direction, the morale of his men. The ocean was calm at first. Gentle waves moved under the ships like slow breathing. But even in calmness, there was uncertainty. No one knew what might come next. Days passed. The routine of the ship slowly became the crew's entire world. Wake up with the sun, check the sails, repair ropes, watch the horizon, sleep under the stars, then repeat. But the silence of the ocean was not comforting for everyone. Some sailors began to feel restless. Others became anxious. The idea of being surrounded by water with no land in sight slowly affected their minds. The horizon never seemed closer. It always stayed the same distance away, as if the world had no end. Food supplies were still enough at this stage, but the crew knew they could not last forever. Water had to be carefully managed. Every drop mattered. Every decision mattered. Magellan understood this pressure. He reminded his crew to stay disciplined. He knew that leadership at sea was not only about navigation, it was about controlling fear. One night, the ocean changed. Dark clouds gathered slowly above the ships. The wind began to shift direction. The calm water turned rough. Waves grew higher, and the ships started to rise and fall more violently. A storm was approaching. The sailors rushed to secure everything. Ropes were tightened, sails were adjusted, voices were raised, but quickly lost in the sound of wind and water. The storm hit without warning. Rain poured heavily, reducing visibility to almost nothing. The ocean became chaotic, as if it had turned into a living force. Waves crashed against the ships, shaking their structure. Every sailor held on tightly, fearing the ocean might swallow them completely. Magellan stayed calm through it all. He gave orders clearly and quickly. His experience at sea allowed him to understand the rhythm of the storm. He knew that panic would only make things worse. After hours of struggle, the storm began to fade. The wind slowed. The waves lowered. And slowly, the ocean returned to its previous state of silence. But the memory of the storm remained. The crew realized something important that night. The ocean was not just a path to cross, it was a force to survive. And their journey had only just begun. The storm had passed, but its shadow remained. The ocean was calm again, yet nothing felt the same. The sailors moved more quietly now, as if the sea might suddenly wake up and strike again.
Every rope, every sail, every sound of the ship reminded them of what they had just survived. Ferdinand Magellan stood on the deck, looking at the endless water. His face showed no fear, but deep thought. He understood something the others were only beginning to feel. The ocean had its own rhythm, its own patience, and its own power. Days turned into weeks. The ships continued forward across the Atlantic Ocean. There was no land in sight, only sky above and water below. The horizon remained distant and unchanged, no matter how far they traveled. This constant emptiness slowly began to affect the crew. At first, it was small things. Conversations became shorter. Laughter became rare. People began to sit alone, staring at the sea for long periods without speaking. The ocean, in its silence, was slowly pressing into their minds. Then came the doubts. Some sailors started questioning the journey. They whispered among themselves during the night. Was this route really possible? Was there truly a passage to Asia on the other side? Or were they simply sailing endlessly into nothing? Magellan heard these concerns, but he did not react with anger. He understood that fear spreads faster than wind at sea. Instead, he focused on discipline. He reminded them of their mission, their purpose, and the vision of reaching Asia through a new route. But even strong words cannot fully remove fear from tired hearts. One night, something unusual happened. The sea became unusually still. No wind, no waves, just silence. The ships floated on a flat, endless surface, as if the ocean itself had stopped moving. The crew felt uneasy. This kind of silence was not comforting. It felt unnatural. The sailors looked around, confused and nervous. Some believed it was a sign. Others thought something worse was coming. Magellan knew it was only a temporary calm, but even he respected it. The ocean was unpredictable. It could be peaceful one moment and violent the next. Hours passed in that strange stillness. Then, slowly, the wind returned. The sails began to move again. The ships continued forward. But something had changed inside the crew. The ocean was no longer just water and waves. It had become a presence, something powerful, something unknown. As they moved deeper into the Atlantic, the feeling of isolation grew stronger. There was no sign of land, no birds, no direction except the stars at night. The world had become infinite water. And somewhere in that vast emptiness, the crew began to realize a deeper truth. They were far from everything they knew, and there was no turning back. The expedition was no longer just a journey. It was a test of endurance, of fear, and of human belief in the unknown. The land slowly disappeared. The ocean stretched endlessly in every direction. After weeks at sea, the crew had lost all sense of distance. There were no landmarks, no islands, no familiar signs of land. Only water beneath them and sky above them, both blending together at the horizon like a never-ending loop. Ferdinand Magellan remained steady, but even he knew the pressure was growing. The voyage was testing everyone, not just their bodies, but their minds. Food supplies were still enough, but carefully measured. Water was rationed strictly. Every sailor understood that survival depended on discipline, yet discipline becomes harder when hope begins to fade. The ocean had a strange effect on time. Days felt longer, but also meaningless. One sunrise looked the same as the next. One wave looked like every other wave. Slowly, the crew stopped counting days the way they used to. Instead, they started counting feelings: tiredness, hunger, doubt, and something deeper: uncertainty. Whispers returned again among the sailors, not loud arguments, but quiet conversations in corners of the ship. Some believed they had already sailed too far. Others thought they were being led in circles. A few even feared they would never see land again. Magellan noticed this growing tension. He walked among the crew, speaking less but observing more. He understood that leadership at sea was not only about commands, it was about keeping belief alive when reality gives no answers. One morning, a change appeared on the horizon. A few sailors spotted something unusual. The color of the water seemed slightly different. Birds appeared in the sky, small at first, then more frequent. These signs were subtle, but at sea, even small signs carry meaning. Hope began to rise again. If birds were present, land could not be too far away. The crew became alert. Energy returned slowly. People began looking outward more often, scanning the horizon with renewed attention. Even the silence of the ocean felt less heavy than before. But days passed, and land still did not appear. Hope and doubt began to fight inside the minds of the sailors. Every time they thought land was near, nothing appeared. Every time they trusted the signs, disappointment followed. This cycle slowly drained their confidence again. Magellan understood something important. The ocean did not reveal its secrets quickly. It tested patience. It challenged belief. It pushed humans to the edge of giving up. And that edge was exactly where many journeys failed. But he refused to turn back. He believed the route was real. He believed the world was larger and more connected than people imagined. And most importantly, he believed that perseverance would eventually lead them forward. One night, as the ship moved under a sky filled with stars, Magellan stood alone at the front of the deck. The ocean was calm again. But this time, the calm felt different. Not peaceful, but waiting, as if something beyond the horizon was finally close. The crew did not know it yet, but they were approaching a turning point in the journey, a moment where belief would be tested one more time, and where the unknown would begin to reveal itself.
The night was unusually quiet. After weeks of uncertainty, the ocean had settled into a deep, endless calm. The ships moved forward slowly, almost silently, as if the sea itself was holding its breath. The crew no longer spoke much. Even fear had turned into exhaustion. Ferdinand Magellan stood at the front of his ship, eyes fixed on the horizon. Something felt different now. Not loud, not obvious, but present, like a change in the air before a storm, except this time it was not fear, it was anticipation. The sailors noticed it first. The birds returned in greater numbers, not just a few scattered in the sky, but flocks moving in one direction. The watercolor shifted again, becoming slightly different, less deep, less endless. Floating pieces of sea plants began to appear near the ships. Whispers spread quickly across the deck. Land. Maybe land is near. But no one dared to fully believe it. They had been disappointed before. Hope had been broken too many times in this endless ocean. Still, something was different this time. Magellan gave a silent order to adjust the sails. The ships moved carefully forward, guided not just by navigation, but by instinct and observation. Every man on board stood alert, watching the horizon as if it might reveal a secret at any moment. Hours passed. Then, suddenly, the wind changed direction. It was not violent, not chaotic, just a shift, gentle but meaningful, the kind of change that sailors learn to respect deeply. The ships adjusted their course slightly, following the wind's new path. And then it happened. A shape appeared far ahead. At first, it was just a shadow against the sky. Many thought it was a cloud resting too low. But as they moved closer, the shape became clearer. It was solid. It was real. Land. A wave of silence swept across the crew. No shouting, no celebration, just disbelief. For a few moments, no one moved. It was as if their minds refused to accept what their eyes were seeing. After so many days of endless water, the idea of land felt unreal. Then, slowly, emotion returned. Some sailors fell to their knees. Others held the ropes tightly, staring forward without blinking. A few laughed in shock, unable to control their relief. Tears appeared on faces that had not shown emotion for weeks. Magellan did not react loudly. He simply stood still, watching the land ahead. This was not just a destination, it was proof. Proof that the world was larger, more connected, and more mysterious than many believed. Proof that persistence could push humanity beyond fear and doubt. But even in victory, he remained cautious. The coastline was still unknown. The journey was not truly over. New lands always carried new dangers, new questions, and new challenges. Yet for the crew, this moment was enough. They had crossed the invisible boundary between fear and discovery. The ocean behind them now felt smaller, not because it had changed, but because they had changed. They were no longer just sailors surviving the sea. They had become explorers who touched the edge of the unknown and lived to tell the story. And as the ships moved slowly toward the distant shore, one truth settled into every heart on board. The greatest expedition is not about reaching land. It is about surviving the journey that changes who you are forever.